Enough comedians.
Okay, we're live on YouTube now, so just be aware of what you're saying. But we thank the Senate Scott family for sponsoring today's learning in memory of Mrs. Scott. So again, no class next week. A lot of exciting things coming up in the coming weeks. Hanukkah's around the corner, and with Hanukkah coming up around the corner, starting this Monday night, we're having another s'mores series. That doesn't mean eating s'mores, though you are welcome to eat s'mores if you like. That is myself and three of my other Christians who live in the South. That is Dallas, Houston, and Atlanta will be joining with us. And each week, another one of us will be speaking and talking about Hanukkah as you prepare for Hanukkah, which is now just 24 days away. So if you haven't bought your presents, now is the time to do so. Okay.
Real quick, Rabbi.
Yes, sir.
Just a message to all the people on. If you're not talking, please mute yourself.
Yeah, I was just muting everybody as we're speaking. That's perfect. Okay. We're much better now. All right, well, I want to talk about an interesting topic. I think it'll be interesting to a lot of us. It affects all of us in some way or another, which is I want to talk about the responsibility that we have to the elderly, and in particular, the idea of caring for our elders. And if I were to ask you, how are we supposed to treat our elders or those who are elderly, what would you say?
Give them what they want.
Give them what they want, okay?
Rabbi, I remember when my mother first became ill, I went to my principal and I explained to her that my mother was ill and I was going to have to take more time off than I normally would. And her reply to me was, Brenda, teaching is your occupation. Taking care of your mother is your obligation.
So why this might sound heretical, but why are we why must we do that?
Because our parents took care of us.
So you're saying that because our parents take care of us, we need to take care of them?
I would think so.
Give me 1 second. I'm actually going to mute everybody. So if you want to talk, just unmute because there's some feedback somewhere. I'm not sure where it's coming from. Okay, now if you'd like to speak, just unmute yourselves. So what does Judaism actually say about getting older? Do we see people who are older? Do we see them as being more valuable in society, less valuable in society? Do we think that they deserve more respect, less respect?
We see them as being wise. We see them as being deserving of respect. They're also a connection, if we go all the way back, to God, and that in itself is worth recognizing.
Yeah, there is a famous story of Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky was on a plane once talking about his grandchildren were on the plane with him, and his grandchildren were coming to dote on him. I think he was actually with a minister from in the government in Israel, I think it was. And this minister who was not observant, turned to him and said, the way your grandchildren are doting on you is just unbelievable. I can't get my grandchildren to pay me any attention at all. And he gave a very famous, again, legendary response that he talked about how my grandchildren see me as being one step closer to Sinai and therefore closer to Sinai and having more being closer to the tradition and the source, whereas those who are not observant, who don't see it that way, they see as the further along being more evolutionary in design and farther advanced, and therefore they think they are more deserving of respect versus those who are closer to Sinai. So there is that as well. I want to share with you just a few sources. There's a lot to talk about just in this topic in general. Let me share my screen with you. So we have over here a Gemara in Shabbos that I want to read with you. So the Gemara in Shabbos says as follows. Oh, I'll make it a little bigger. Okay. So Tanya. Rabbi Yossi Bar Kusmi Omer, Rabbi Yossi Bar Kusmi teaches that Tava Tre Mitzlat, that 2 feet of one's youth are better than the 3 of old age. In other words, what are the 3 feet that someone who's older has? So it means when someone walks with a cane. In other words, Rabbi Yossi Bar Kusmi is trying to tell us that He says, woe to the one who goes and does not come back. What's this referring to? Rav Chisda says, youth. In other words, they say the Gemara understands, the rabbis emphasize that getting older is not easy. They are sensitive to that. They understand it. In fact, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, he said, youth is a crown of roses, but old age is a crown of thorns. In other words, it's not such a good thing almost to become older. And we find this idea in Pirkei Avos as well in the 4th chapter, where Elisha ben Avuya teaches, Halomed Yeled L'mahu Domeh, what's it like to teaching a child? L'jok tuval niyar chadash, it's like giving fresh ink to a fresh piece of paper, right? Crisp, clean. Halomed Zakein, when you try to teach someone who's elderly, L'mahu Domeh, what is it? What are they like? What's that compared to? L'jok tuval niyar machuk, to ink that's written on a page of paper that's been erased over and over again, a paper that's just, it's not clean, it's not crisp anymore. In other words, it's a lot easier to teach new things to young people, and it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. And that resonates with us. But what's interesting is that the Mishnah, unlike what we saw in the Gemara here, which seems to talk about how getting old is just a bad thing, the Mishnah here, whereas it sounds like, getting old is not so good, whereas, being young is great because you're sharp and you're quick and you've got a clean slate. The Mishnah, however, continues. Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda ish kfar abavli omer halomed min aktani l'mahu domeh ve'ochal anavim kehot v'shoteh yain megito. So Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda says that what is learning from young people considered like? It's like eating unripe grapes or drinking wine from the vat. Whereas on the other hand, halomed min zakenim, a person who learns from those who are elderly, l'mahu domeh, what are you compared to? What's it compared to? It's to eating ripe grapes and drinking good old wine. In other words, that young people don't quite have the same wisdom as people who are a little bit older than us. And those who are elderly, while they might while being older is not always so easy, they bring a lot of wisdom. And in fact, in Shmot Rabbah, when the very beginning of the story towards the middle, I should say, of the story of the Exodus of Egypt, the Medrash tells us in box number 3 that Lech v'asafta ziknei Yisrael, God commands Moshe to bring together all of the zakenim, all of the elders. What's the significance of bringing the elders? We always think of the elders as being the leaders of the people, but why is it so significant? Because le'olam zakenim ma'amidim et Yisrael. It's an amazing idea that in the merit of the Jewish people, that we continue to exist because of these people. It's an amazing idea that we are able, that the Jewish people continue. They're mamid. They are held up by the zakenim, and we see this throughout Tanakh. Anytime that we talk about the zakenim, the elders, as being so important. Now, what's fascinating is that it's not just an idea of so we ask them, why does a person need to show respect to elders? So it's an explicit halacha. The Torah tells us in box number 4 in Vayikra that mipnei seva takum v'adarta pnei zaken v'yaretem malacha ani Hashem, that we need to rise before the aged, we need to show deference to those who are older, and we need to fear God. And there's a direct correlation here. There's this Torah obligation. And the Gemara in Kiddushin explains that, what does it mean? I'll just say it outside. What does it mean that, what do we mean when we say that you need to, mipnei seva takum, that you need to show respect to those who are older? So the Gemara in Kiddushin says that the word zakein literally means one who acquires wisdom. It's a what's the word I'm looking for? It stands for, it's short for one who acquires wisdom. And so we see that in fact the Gemara in Kiddushin as well talks about how it's not just that old people acquire wisdom, but even a person who is elderly, who is maybe not the smartest person, maybe they never were educated, just the fact that they've gone through life in itself, that gives them enough. They may not have to be book smart, but they are wise enough and therefore are deserving of our respect because they have literally lived through the world. But the question that I want to ask is, does that responsibility of showing respect and caring for the elderly and helping and supporting them, does that still exist if and when, let's say a parent, for example, an older parent is, God forbid, senile, right? Or they can't, or they're not showing wisdom, where they're not being wise, where they're making poor choices. Does such a thing still exist where we need to show our parents respect and show elders who are again senile? They can't share that wisdom. Do we have to still treat them in that way?
Yes.
So why? I mean, the answer I think is obviously yes, but why?
Well, because you said they're senile, so they're not really thinking as they did when they were younger and they had their faculties.
Correct. But if one of the major reasons the Gemara and Kedushin is telling us that we're supposed to show respect and we're supposed to honor those who are elderly in our community, in our homes, is because of the wisdom that they had, even if it's not book smarts, it's just life experience. What about someone who just can't see clearly anymore, God forbid? Let's say someone, God forbid, has dementia. Do they still deserve, or should they still have the same level of respect as somebody else?
Absolutely.
Well, they're all made in the image of God, so that's the very base level of respect.
So I'm asking this question, I'm setting us up because our Parsha deals with just this exact question, and the outcome is not what you would expect if you think about it through this frame. So let's jump into our Parsha.
I would come at it from a different.
Yeah, please, Paul.
I mean, I have people all the time, my mother, father, whatever, they don't need to be driving. You can respect someone, but you can also not necessarily support their bad decisions and do something disrespectful by taking away their car.
You're saying that you should, someone who is really not, it wouldn't be safe for them to have a car. So you're saying that there are times, Paul's saying there might be a gray area maybe, where there are times where we don't have to show that same level of respect or support for someone who's elderly if it's for their own good.
But is that really being disrespectful? Taking away their privilege for to not drive? In that being, I would think that would be respectful, that you think enough of your parent. I went through this with my mother, as a lot of people know. I would think that taking away the privilege for driving would be a form of respect to preserve their safety.
Could be. So maybe there is
a lot of people don't look at it like that.
But isn't it showing respect in terms of you don't want them to injure themselves or someone else? So therefore that's why you're doing this.
Yeah.
Right, when they say you're taking away my freedom,
right,
my last vestige of freedom, I mean, that's disrespectful, I guess.
So this is.
Rabbi, I just want to add one thing. I think if you're the person, and if you divide it into what's business is taking away their car, and then what's personal. Personal is, not showing them respect in what they're doing in their personal lives. And I try to divide it up into two different things. If somebody's taking my car away, I wouldn't like it. It's not freedom. We can go but it's still business. Nobody just abruptly woke up one morning and said, I'm taking your car away. They took it away because you had an accident, you had some situations. And that's not personal. Personal is when you deal with your parents or old people on more personal things to help protect them and to show them respect and, that kind of stuff. And I think that's what I try to do, is divide up into what's business, what's really got to be taken care of. It's not personally affecting them or showing disrespect to them.
Right, that's an interesting distinction that you're making, Bernard. Right, I think that's very interesting. Sorry, someone else?
Don't you also think that, I guess, the way you handle it is either respectful or not respectful?
Yeah,
I mean,
think, yeah.
I'm not saying that you can totally rationalize with someone in that position because you can't always rant, but you can still do it more respectfully or less respectfully the way you do it.
Yeah. So
I think you have some responsibility to look and see what services are there in the community that can substitute for taking the car away. It won't be 100%, but it's better than nothing.
Well, so let me reframe our question back towards our Parsha for just a moment. Let me ask it like this. Ready? We know. I mean, I think we have a general idea of the Parsha. What happens? So we've got Yaakov comes along, and there's Yaakov and Esav, their brothers, and we know that that Yitzchak favors Esav, and he wants to give a blessing to Esav. And that's where chapter 27 in box number 6 picks up on. And I don't want to spoil the story, but Yaakov is going to steal the bracha from his brother, and he's going to trick his father. I want to spend a minute looking at that. So let's look at chapter 27 here, verse number 1. Notice the language the Torah is using to describe Isaac. It doesn't just say that he was living, but rather he was old. The same language that we saw before. Ki zaken Yitzchak. And not only that, he can't see clearly. There's an issue with his vision. It's very important. And so what does he do? He calls out to his son and he says, come forward. And he answers Hineni. This word Hineni is quite significant because where else do we see this? This is the same language which is used elsewhere. Avram responds with Hineni, here I am, God, right? I'm right in front of you.
By Yitzchak, by the Akedah.
Correct. He says Hineni. So Esav is responding. This sounds like a big moment here. He's responding just the way he's supposed to. And so what does he say? Vayomer hinena zakanti v'lo yadati yomoti. I'm getting old and I don't know when I'm going to die. Therefore, go out and prepare for me a delicious meal. Why? Next verse. So bavur torecha nafshi b'ter mamut. Let me bless you before I die. Lo and behold, Rivka shomat b'daber Yitzchak. Rivka, Yitzchak's wife, hears what's happening when he talks El Esav beno to his son Esav. Vayelach Esav asadat sutzai lavi. Esav goes out to get food. Rivka amra el Yaakov b'na lemor. Rivka goes and tells her son Yaakov, Hinei shamati dabicha medaber el Esav achicha lemor. I heard that what your father said to your brother. You're never going to believe it. This is what you need to do. Bring me food, and I will bless you in front of Hashem before I die. That's what Yitzchak told Esav. Now listen to this language. V'ata b'ni shma b'koli. Rivka says to her son Yaakov, listen carefully to my voice. La'asher ani mitzavotach, exactly as I'm going to tell you what to do. Listen carefully to what I have to say. Go, lechna al atzom v'kachli misham shnei gedei ezim. And long story short, she says, go and get these animals, and I'll prepare the dish, and I'll give the dish to Yitzchak, and he won't know. Yomer Yaakov Rivka. Yaakov says to Rivka, his mother, with all due respect, mommy, this is great that I can bring the food. That he'll think that this food was food from Esav, but guess what? Hein Esav achi ish sa'ir v'anochi ish chalak. Esav's a hairy man. I'm just a smooth-skinned dude, right? It's going to be obvious. Even though he can't see well, he can feel, he can touch, he'll be able to notice. Ulayim shoni avi v'ayiti benav kamita that I'm going to be a trickster to his eye, and he's going to curse me instead of bless me. And so what does his mother say? Rivka says, don't worry, if he curses you, let it be on me. And sure enough, he goes and does all the stuff, and he prepares all the thing, all while Esav is out in the fields. So let's look now. Let's look to what happens now. Vayavo el avi, vayomer avi. So Yaakov now comes to his father and says to his father, vayomer hineni. Says, here I am. Mi atabani. He wants to know, which son are you? Vayomer Yaakov el avi. Yaakov responds, Anochi Esav b'chorecha. He's lying to his father and says, I'm Esav. Asiti, I did. Kasher dibarta elai. I did exactly like you told me to do. And he says, come and enjoy this delicious food. Now Yitzchak responds, Vayomer Yitzchak el beno, ma zo maharta limso b'ni. He says, how did you come back so quick? Man, you made great time. Vayomer, he says, Ki hikra Hashem Elohecha lefanai. God granted me good fortune. Now, if you know Esav and Yaakov a little bit, this was a tip-off, because Esav doesn't say God was good to me. He made me come quickly. So all of a sudden we see that Yitzchak starts to become suspicious. Vayomer Yitzchak al Yaakov, Yishanav amshucha b'ni, hataz b'nei Esav mo. Come here for a second. Let me see if you're really Esav, because he's uncertain all of a sudden. Vayigash Yaakov al Yitzchak aviv. So Yaakov comes, and he comes close. And Yitzchak says to himself, Hakol kol Yaakov adayim de Esav. The voice is the voice of Yaakov, but the hands are Esav's. In other words, he touches Esav, and he touches and he feels an Esav, but he hears in his mind Yaakov, and he is confused. And he's confused. The Torah tells us, "V'lo hikiro ki hayu yadav kidei Esav achiv serad v'yevarcheu." And so he blessed him. He didn't realize who it was. And then he even asks him explicitly. He says, "Vayomer ata zeh b'ni Esav." Are you really Esav? And how does he respond, Yaakov? Vayomer ani, I am. That's what he says. Ani, I am. Now, Rashi famously says that he doesn't really lie to his father. When he says I am, he really means I am what I am. Not that I am Esav, I just am. I am a person, I am a this. I am Yaakov. He doesn't actually say, yes, I am Esav. So that's a stretch. And nonetheless, the Torah continues and tells us how he goes and receives the blessing instead of his brother Esav. So now that we've read this story, and now that we've spent a minute talking about the importance of showing respect to our elderly parents or those who are elderly and how they are wise and that we need to support them, how do we feel about Yaakov's actions? How do we make sense of this? Number one, how could Yitzchak have been so fooled by Esav to begin with? Right? Why was it necessary to even trick Yitzchak? Why doesn't Rivka just go over and talk to him? And most importantly, how can fooling one's elderly blind father be considered ethically appropriate behavior? And if it's not ethical, do we believe that the ends justify the means? He needed to get the bracha, so he did what he had to do. What do you think? How do we make sense of this story? This is a story of a child showing the opposite of respect for his parent, who takes advantage of the elderly, takes advantage of the fact that his father can't see well. What do you think?
Can you not say that when it says he couldn't see, maybe he really wasn't blind, but he just couldn't realize or recognize the type of person Esav was. Not that he was hairy, but that he was kind of dark, shady sort of a fellow.
Sure.
And so he was making bad decisions. And he was going to give the blessing to him just because he was the older son.
So you're saying that the ends justify the means, that it was okay for him to trick his father and to be ethically, in the gray area, because his father, like the example of driving the car, right? Like he was about to make a terrible decision. He wasn't fit to be giving blessings to anybody. So Yaakov needed to take it into his own hands and do it himself. That's what you're saying. Does everyone agree with that? I'm not disagreeing, I'm just asking. One of the things that always bothered me about this story is that it doesn't really look so good for the Jewish people, right? It's not a great story. Forget about the fact that you have a son who's not being respectful to a father. That's one part of the story. It's not a great look. If you were the other nations of the world, what would you say about the Jewish people? Well, they only got God's blessings because they stole it. And by the way, lest you think that it's just a hypothetical, thought that someone might think in an anti-Semitic world, take a look at what the Gemara in Avodah Zarah tells us. This actually happened with the Romans. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. The Gemara continues to discuss Roman festivals. So Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, they have another festival in Rome once every 70 years. They bring a man who is whole and free from any defect, meaning strong man, and they have him ride on a lame man. And what does that symbolize? It symbolizes the healthy Esav ruling over Yaakov, who walked with a limp after his fight with the angel, right? Yaakov, we know later in the story, he ends up limping. He's hurt from fighting with the angel. And so he's not whole. And so they have one man literally ride on the other one. They dress him in the garments of Adam Arishon. They place on his head the scalp, the karki fellow of Rabbi Shmuel, whom the Romans flayed when they executed him. And they make this entire, this whole episode to show that who is the real champion, who is the real person who is the person who should have received it. Esav is the strong one, but Yaakov is just a trickster. In fact, I didn't want to put this on a source sheet because I didn't want to give it credence, but there's an article that was once quoted by David Duke from the KKK. He quoted an article entitled The Culture of Deceit. And listen to the words from this. I'll just read it to you for a minute. So what is the archetype of the Jew in the Jew's own founding myth? Is that of the liar or trickster? Recall what happens in Genesis 27. Nearing death, the elderly Isaac sends Esav out to trap game in order to prepare a meal appropriate to the blessing Isaac was to bestow upon his first son. And with Rebekah's participation, Jacob deceived his father into believing that he was in fact Esav. Numerous times, Yitzchak suspected a ruse, finally asking, "Are you really my son Esav?" "I am," Yaakov lies. Jacob was ultimately successful in deceiving his father and receiving his blessing. This passage is a stark instance in which we see the origin for the still common Jewish belief that the others, that goyim, are to serve them. Let people serve you and nations bow down to you, be lord over your brothers. In other words, this is the foundation for some of the most basic anti-Semitic ideas that we have to live with. So how do we make sense of the story? How do we understand that Yaakov needed to act in this way? How do we make sense of the story that he had to use trickery in this way and to be disrespectful to his elderly father who couldn't see well? And so I think there are actually a number of different approaches for us to kind of look at this. So one is that we can actually say that Yitzchak was totally fooled by Esav. Like Paul said, he was blind. He couldn't see how bad things really was. And had he done that, had Yitzchak brought Esav into the quote unquote covenantal community by passing on to him the blessings from Abraham that he received, so that would have been a big problem. That would have been the end of everything as we know it. And so Rivka and Yaakov, and this is the way they teach it to you in Hebrew school or in day school, they had to act heroically, right? They jeopardized their own relationships with their father, with their spouse, in order to ensure the future of the Jewish people. And this is a simple approach. Like I said, this is the approach that I think they teach us in grade school. I'm sure my kids will come home from school telling me about the heroism of Yaakov. But there is a problem with this. It's not so simple. For instance, let's look at in the Shulchan Aruch, by the way. The Shulchan Aruch tells us that when someone becomes, what does it mean to honor one's parent? Ezehu kavod. So what is honoring a parent? It means feeding them, giving them drink, dressing and undressing them, bringing them in and taking them out, and to do so with a pleasant face. For even if he feeds him delicacies every day, it does so with a scowl. Punishment will befall him. In other words, it means taking care of a parent no matter what, no matter how old they get. It's showing them that respect and giving them what they need. It's not tricking them. And the Gemara in Kiddushin, let's say you want to suggest, like this simple approach is suggesting, let's say you want to say that in fact, Yitzchak was senile. He made a mistake. He had a form of dementia. He couldn't see clearly. Again, it doesn't mean he was blind, but he couldn't see the mistake he was making. And so therefore it was the ends justify the means, that it was okay for Yaakov to trick his father. Let's say you want to say that. The Gemara in Kiddushin tells stories about even if your parent does something that is so outlandish and someone who's elderly does something so inappropriate, you still need to show them basic respect. In fact, the Gemara tells the story of Rabbi Tarfon. He had a certain manner of treating his mother that whenever she wished to ascend into her bed, he would bend over and help her to ascend. And whenever she wished to descend from the bed, she would descend onto him. He would serve as like a stool for his mother. And in fact, one time, the Gemara tells a story where she actually threw his wallet into the sea with all of his money and all of his IDs, all his cards, like throwing a cell phone into the ocean. And he did this, and she did this, and he still showed her basic respect. In fact, just as a side note, the Gemara continues and talks about another person who has a mother who's elderly, who's driving him crazy. And it's a great line. The Gemara says, and he tried to run away. He tried to escape to Israel. But the Gemara actually continues to say that maybe might not have been the right decision for him to do. But still, here's an example, not so different than our Parsha, of somebody who is not making good choices. Rabbi Tarfon's mother is throwing his wallet into the ocean. And despite those bad decisions, Rabbi Tarfon still shows basic respect. Is this respectful? Is this kavod? Is this the way Kibud Av V'Em that Yaakov is modeling for us by tricking his father, lying to his father, stealing from his father? Doesn't sound right. Rivka, if anything, I would take, like I can't remember who said it. Maybe one of the Bernards mentioned it. If you're going to take away the keys from someone who can't drive anymore, or maybe Irvin said it, it's about how you do it. Why couldn't Rivka take Yitzchak to the side and say, honey, baby, you're making a terrible mistake. You're all confused. Let me help you. You really meant to be blessing Yaakov. Esav is not who you think he is. And so I want to suggest a more complicated approach, a more complex approach to looking at this entire story and looking at our Parsha. And that would be to suggest that Yaakov actually acted not properly, that he made a mistake, and in fact is going to be punished for the way that he acted. So you'll notice that the Torah never tells us explicitly that he was punished for stealing the brachos and for tricking his father. And there's nothing explicit, but there are some hints in the text that I think might show us that this is true. So for example, take a look over here in this last box 10. Notice that when Rivka tells Yaakov he has to run away, she uses the exact same phrase that she uses when she tells him to steal the brachos. It seems to suggest that this whole idea of fooling Yitzchak and tricking his father is what causes him to have to run away, right? Look at the language. V'atabani shma b'koli. Listen to me. Kum barach lecha elavan achi charana. In other words, what this is trying to suggest. Sorry, my mouse isn't working. Look over here again. V'atabani shma b'koli. Listen to what I have to say, Rivka says. Same language. So it's almost drawing our attention in both directions, as if to say that Rivka says, I want you to do this thing. I know that it's wrong. And there's going to be a cost. There's going to be a punishment. And what is the punishment? Yaakov actually leaves his father's house. And what happens when he goes to his next destination in Lavan's house? What happens to him?
He gets tricked.
He himself gets tricked, literally, midah keneged midah. He tricked, and he gets tricked too. And by the way, just as a side note, how does he get tricked? He gets tricked in the middle of the night when instead of taking one daughter of Lavan, he ends up with the other. Instead of taking Rachel, he ends up with Leah in the night. And the essence of the trickery is that he can't see. He doesn't know which woman is the right woman. No different than Yitzchak doesn't know which one of the sons are the right sons. Yitzchak's got two sons and he can't tell them apart. Yaakov can't tell apart two daughters, and he ends up marrying the wrong person. So he ends up getting tricked by this. And more than this, Yaakov ends up tricking his father by doing what? By wearing the skin of a goat, right? So he could be hairy like Esav. What ends up happening later with his own children, with Yosef? He also gets tricked by the brothers, because what do his own children do? They take a goat, and they take the blood of that goat, and they use a goat also to trick him. So he also he's also punished in a sense. And so I want to suggest that there are actually two different areas that deserve punishment in Yaakov's life. The first is for the ethical behavior that he has, which is that he tricks his father. And this comes forward in the fact that he himself is tricked by his own father-in-law. He tricks his dad, his father-in-law tricks him, right? That's punishment for his ethical behavior. But I think there's actually a second piece to this as well, which is, I want to call it in the category of like religious behavior, right? In the realm of playing God. What is he doing? The ends justifying the means. He believes that he needs to make something happen for you, right? This is in the realm of God. So we normally say ein somchim al nes. In regular things, we say, if there's something in your life, don't wait for a miracle. Go grab it, right? The story of a person who is drowning in the sea and he's asking for help, and he says, God's going to save me. God's going to save me. And a man throws out a life preserver, and a helicopter comes and says, no, God's going to save me, right? So we don't rely on miracles. But in the realm of God, that's in the realm of man. But in the realm of God, we can't just make things happen for us, right? Shouldn't Yaakov have had faith that God would have ensured that the legacy of Abraham would have continued, right? Shouldn't that be up to to God himself? Do we really think that had Rivka not have intervened, that Esav and not Yaakov would have been blessed? Like, where is his faith in God for not letting it happen? And so what really emerges is a double punishment for the two mistakes, one being an ethical mistake and the second being a religious mistake. And what are they? They are perfect matches. The first is Yaakov ends up being exiled for 20 years as punishment for tricking his father, right? Midah keneged midah, measure for a measure. And after 20 years living at his own father-in-law, it takes 2 more years of hardship before he returns to his own father, so 22 years. And what happens to his own son? Yosef is sold into slavery as well. And in the same way that he tricked his own father using a goat, and he gets tricked by his own children also, like I said, with the goat. But more than that, the brothers, why do they sell Yosef into slavery? Because they're also trying to act like God. They heard the vision, they heard the dream, they don't want to see it come into fruition. And not only is it the brothers who try to act like God, Yosef himself tries to act like God. The $64 million question that we ask about Yosef in Egypt is, if he's the viceroy, how come he never thinks to call his dad? Pick up the phone. Tell him he's alive. How come he never sends a postcard, never reaches out to him? Nothing. And the answer is, Chazal teach us, that he was trying to ensure that his dreams would come to fruition. In other words, what is it? He's trying to play God. No different than Yaakov was trying to play God as well. And so he also spends 22 years apart, Yaakov, from his son Yosef, 22 years away from his father for the first sin, midah keneged midah, for tricking, he gets pulled away from his father, and 22 years from his own son for challenging God religiously. And so I think we learn from this parsha is that, or this story, is that while there are moments where we need to take things into our own hands, we also need to have great faith in God. And that the story of our parsha is not one where we are, God forbid, advocating for trickery or disrespecting parents or those who are elderly, but rather I would argue that our parsha is emphasizing about no matter how difficult the circumstances are with someone in our family or someone in our life or anyone in our community who is elderly, that they still are deserving of the highest levels of respect, even if it doesn't make sense to us totally. Now, the question of that was brought up earlier about, taking away the car keys and things like that, that's a safety issue. You need to, part of showing respect, I think, is also keeping people safe. But it goes to show you that no matter the age of the person, no matter their wisdom, no matter whether they can see clearly physically or not, no matter whether they can think clearly or not, we still need to show them the proper amount of respect. And that's what we owe them, because they are literally, as I said before in this first source from Shemot Rabbah, the world literally stands, Zakenim Ma'amidim et Yisrael. The Jewish people in the world are held up by the elders. We're held up by our tradition, by those who've come before us, and we should never take that for granted. So we'll wrap up with that. Like I said, we wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. We'll not be meeting next week. We thank the extended Scott family for sponsoring today's learning, and we wish everybody a wonderful day.
Rabbi, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, please.
All right. What would be the consequences if Ishmael had gotten that first blessing of the firstborn? How would that affect the Jewish people?
You mean Esav?
Esav, yes.
So I think so. What I'm suggesting is that there was a plan. That maybe God had a plan. We don't know, or maybe Yitzchak never really intended to give him that bracha. He was going to give him another bracha without this form of intervention. We don't know, right? We don't know. Now we have to have faith in God. That doesn't mean that we should never act. I want to be clear about that. But how and where and when are it's not, that's the part that's not always so clear.
Okay.
Well, good question. So,
Rabbi, what were the repercussions for Rachel?
What do you mean?
I mean, she was really the instigator. She was the one who commenced.
Oh, Rivka. So, yeah. By the way, so think about Rivka also pays a heavy cost. She loses both of her sons, right? Esav doesn't want to talk to her, and she loses Yaakov for the next 22 years. They never see each other again. It's a huge cost. Not to mention the strain on the relationship she has with her husband. Tremendous cost. So in a sense, I think she also is punished. again, I think there's two ways to read this. There's the way that they teach you in like day school, in Hebrew school, and I think that makes a lot of sense, that the ends justify the means, and sometimes you have to do those things. But I don't know if that fits necessarily with how we're meant to treat those who are older. And I think there's also other challenges with that approach. So I'm positing another approach, that Yaakov is actually punished for his actions because they were wrong.
But the other side of it is also, one thing is he was respecting his mother's wishes at the time that he wasn't respecting his father's wishes in a way.
Yeah, that's true.
He was stuck in between a rock and a hard place almost.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But maybe there was a way that he could have respected his mother's wishes. Like when his father asked him who you are, maybe if he didn't lie, right? His mother never said to lie. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah.
What if a parent is been an undeserving and a bad parent to his children all his life, and then as they grow older and this, that, and the other, they're truly undeserving of respect from their children because the parent never showed them the respect that they were due. How can a child in good faith return? It's not returning good faith and honoring your parent when your parent seemingly didn't care all their lives.
So, okay, you're asking a huge question. And look at that, we're out of time. So, you're asking a big, very complicated question. Maybe another class we can tackle that because it's very complex, and it's not just complex because it's not just a legal question. It's an emotional question too, right? It's not just how do we physically, it's not just a question of what's legally required of us or not required of us. There's also how do you deal with the emotions of that? That's complicated. Yeah, good question.
What about Rabbi? Do you agree with me that David Duke would not even accept this alternative explanation for
him?
Why?
I think that the point is that we would agree that that we're not tricksters, and this was a mistake. That's what I'm suggesting. This was a mistake, and there's a punishment. We don't accept trickery. That's not who we are. So, all right, well, let's stop here and just wish everybody a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Take care. Thank you. Thank you again to Irvin, to Mady, to Lane, and the whole family.
Thank you. Yashikoa.
Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.